All right, so this Honda Fit, it's mine, but I did the shocks on it earlier in the week, and then you can see the black shock that's nice and new. It's the only shiny piece in there besides the rotor. Anyway, so getting out the sway bar end link to get the shock out created some problems. These things are on a knuckle and socket type of movement to help with stabilization. And over time, they just get exposed to the elements, salt and other harsh conditions, mainly salt, that just corrodes and rusts everything. So in doing so, trying to put this back together, it just kept spinning and spinning, and finally had no real other way other than to grind out the head. The top one I was able to get out, the bottom one I had to grind out, as you can see. And I don't like doing this too much because it can create some damage to whatever component it's in. This one, it's the lower control arm, which is fine. If I had to grind out the top one, I'd be looking at compromising the metal that supports it, the support bracket for that, and that'd be really terrifying. I probably would go to like a blowtorch method if I had to, just to try and break the nut free. But I bought these, and they came with a nice nut lock with a nylon lock in it. So hopefully when I run these down, they were a lot easier. I didn't figure this out until the next one, you'll probably see, but I'm just trying to figure out the best method to put this in. And so this is the old sway bar link end, and it's just shot with all of the rubber hose or the rubber boot around it, and it's super loose. As you can see, it's supposed to be rigid. It's supposed to be harder to move. It creates that stiffness, that tightness that you feel when you're driving. And so if your suspension is real loose and you're real loosey on the road, so to speak, then you eat up tires. It costs money. I mean, these parts cost $15-20 each. Changing them out's a pain in the butt sometimes. I don't like working on the ground, but I always find myself doing brake jobs, which is pretty funny. So on this side, I encountered a problem just taking off the wheel, and I was talking during it, but I basically tore off a wheel stud. And at this point, I'm thinking, how in the world do I change this out? Because these sometimes aren't that easy to just replace. Sometimes you can get away with knocking it out the backside, and you've got enough clearance that you can just insert a new one, and you're done. Usually on trucks, I think. These smaller cars, everything's real compact. So my logic was to remove the assembly and try and get at it from the backside. But I didn't record that. I was pretty frustrated, and I had to stop because I was trying to figure out what to do and think. I ended up getting it down, which was fine. There's still some issues that I got to address, but anyway, this is just a little snippet of how to change out the coils onto the new shocks. And so the new shock is sitting up there at the top, and I'm working on the old one. And basically, you take these devices, these clamps, and you run them down with an impact, and it's incredible amounts of pressure that are under these. It's under a lot of load, and a lot of guys hurt themselves. I think everything's pretty dangerous with mechanic work if you're not smart about it. And you can see me kind of like being a little bashful too, just like running it down, making sure that it's going to stay. I even like tell it to behave and not spring up on me, because that's a lot of load. It could really hurt if it came up on you. So then once it's compressed, I can run out the nut, and I can take out the nut that holds that whole coil assembly together, and then kind of dissect it, as you'll see me doing. I'm just learning it because I did it on one. Don't exactly remember how I did it. That's kind of one of my downfalls, is I learn as I go, and then I remember as I go. I get it done either way. So, but then I'm just like, oh yeah, that's how you do that. Maybe next time I'll write down some notes. So yeah, you just see me like fidgeting with this thing, trying to figure out what's the best method to get it back in. I eventually get it, but sometimes I'll overcomplicate things and make it a little bit harder than it needs to be. If you take a step back sometimes from a project when you get frustrated, it really helps, especially with mechanic work, because you can get so involved in, like, this is a great example right here. I'm just trying to figure out like what is happening to this right now, and then I go, screw it, I'll do it a different way. Ah, there you go, you dummy. Not quite. So once you set it, there's a set point down at the bottom of the coil. Yeah, it's a little indentation, dimple where the spring sits on. And once you find that, um, just lining everything up, trying the best that you can to make sure that it all stays in place while you undo the coils under the tension. And at that point, you're pretty much set. Um, so not incredibly complicated, but can be definitely dangerous. And having an air tool to help run down the nuts is, I think, essential. Can't imagine you doing this by hand without an air tool and an impact gun. So went pretty smooth. And I'm just double checking and triple checking everything. I like to run my nuts down also by hand as much as I can first before I start torquing on it with an impact. And this is because there's been a lot of times where I get excited and use the impact, and then I end up ruining a part because I stripped the bolt out because I didn't set it on right. And I had a mechanic, I guess he was my professor, tell me that, you know, if you just take your time setting in a bolt, you'll never spend more money than you have to. And time is money too, because these parts aren't always available. And if you have to order it and wait a day, then you're really screwed. So I don't like to do that as much as I can. So anyway, this is just the disassembling of the coil spring tool, and then the rest is pretty much straightforward. Putting everything back in, and then putting the new sway bar link on, which went on like butter, and that was great. I did put the spindle nut back on, but a couple days later, actually the next day, I realized I had to go back in and tighten it down because the rotor was moving around. So thanks for watching, and I'll maybe make another one later.